Some of you have attended previous sessions of this webinar series, but for those of you who may not be as familiar, I'll share a little bit of my background so that you know about my transition actually from the law to consulting, which is probably relevant to most of the people on this call. I was actually an employment law litigator who had a landmark case, as Jim alluded to, in the area of diversity. So I won the first class action under the Americans with Disabilities Act back in the 90s. After that, I pivoted to international mergers and acquisitions law, M&A law, for two reasons. One, I wanted a more international career, frankly, because I was always fascinated by culture, and two, because I began to feel that as an attorney, I was more a part of the workforce problem than I was a part of the solution. So while at negotiation tables throughout the world, I developed a model for improving cross-cultural communication that's now being used by EY, that's Ernst & Young in its talent division, Aon Hewitt in its mergers and acquisitions division, and Deloitte in its global mobility division, serving thousands of clients throughout the world. I scaled that business to 65 countries, sold it to Ernst & Young, where I became a direct admit partner in human capital, leading culture, inclusion, and innovation. So I have that connection, that strong connection between inclusion and culture and innovation, which is a big part of my work today. After my earnout with EY, I started my new company called Lead Inclusively, where our team focuses entirely on the sustainable solutions that basically connect inclusion with business performance. And we serve clients like Qualcomm and Roche Pharmaceuticals, FedEx, and many more. So at this moment, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat bar by company and role if you'd like to interact with your colleagues. There's a wealth of experience on this call, and we can all learn from each other by using the chat bar throughout this session. Some people find it really, really informative, and hopefully you will be distracted by that with the learning that we're trying to share today. I think it enriches the learning, in my opinion. So that's me, sorry, with my slide advancement here, and there I am, photoshopped and all. In terms of our role as a consulting firm, we're here to help you get a healthy mix of different people in the workplace. But just as important, if not more so, we're here to help you to take meaningful steps towards the culture of inclusion that's going to support and empower that healthy mix of individuals to rise to senior leadership so that we can consistently have diversity at all levels of the organization in a way that, frankly, is self-perpetuating. So although most of our work is serving companies like yours directly, we're also committed to the bigger picture of creating and winning the case for change. In fact, so much so that we will be providing a complimentary business case PowerPoint deck that we update, by the way, on a quarterly basis for everyone who needs additional assistance in building their case for change. And of course, that case for change evolves over time, which is why we offer those updates. If you do sign up on our website for our newsletter, you'll be part of that whole process of the update. So after this webinar, we'll be sending the deck to all attendees, along with a recording of this webinar and a link to our organizational inclusion mini assessment. So watch for that in your inbox. Just out of curiosity, I'd be interested to know how many of you attended a Champions of Change webinar with me before. As Jim mentioned, this is the third in a series, so feel free to chat that into the chat box if you like. In the first webinar, we discussed the amazing benefits that the workforce experiences when women and men partner together and advance women through senior leadership. In the second webinar, we discussed the metrics that matter to identify where the talent pipeline is leaking and which metrics should be tracked to assist in moving diverse people through the talent pipeline. If you missed that webinar, the recording is on our website at leadinclusively.com. Just hover over, I believe it's media, and you'll get, or resources, sorry, and do a drop down to media. You'll see my TED Talk, and right underneath that, you'll see the first two in the series. Today, as you know, I'll be taking you through an overview of creating and winning the case for diversity and inclusion change in your organizations. We'll be focusing basically on how to create buy-in. So whether you're a leader driving organizational change in your business unit, an HR or a diversity and inclusion leader needing to really excite your team around D&I, or you're an individual contributor seeking to promote positive change in your company, from from there, we'll actually be effectively making and winning the case for change. So hopefully all of you will get some very, very important information about moving forward. Let me level set a little by saying that there are over 200 people on this webinar, and each of you are at various stages of your organizational and personal diversity and inclusion journey. And if you're at one extreme or the other, please do reach out to us after the webinar, and I can share with you some materials that will be directly related to your stage of the journey. Our email, by the way, is info@leadinclusively.com, and I'll have Chelsea put that email address in the chat box now so that you have it for later, basically. Now, before we begin, are there any questions? And Chelsea or Jim, if there are any, just let me know. And of course, as Jim mentioned, I'll be stopping throughout the presentation for questions. So you'll have plenty of an opportunity as we move on.
Folks, just so you know, Denise cannot see the chat room, which is why we interrupt on occasion. Denise, just so you're aware, we have Nancy from Japan joining us as well. So we have
great.
As well as Asians on this call. These are becoming more and more and more popular as we go through. I can't wait
understood.
Comes up.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, and that's okay, great. That's great to know too, because obviously there is a global maturity model that we bring to the table, and the issues that we're dealing with here in the States are dramatically different than what we're dealing with clients in Japan. So anyone from Japan, China, anyone on the call from that part of the world, feel free to reach out to us, and we can schedule an appointment to actually talk about that maturity model. So we'll continue from here. Let's begin this whole discussion about buy-in. According to Harvard University research, 70% of all organizational change efforts fail. And one reason for this is that executives simply don't get enough buy-in from the right people from the very beginning for their initiatives and ideas. Creating buy-in is important whether you're at the top of an organization or an individual contributor. In the case of an individual contributor working from the bottom up, you need to have decision makers as sponsors and basically compelling data that aligns with your organizational priorities. But no matter where you are in your organization, in order to create buy-in, you must prove that you understand the issues and the personas that are impacted. Buy-in occurs when you can bring to life your initiatives through the storyline of the actual people that are impacted. And to do that, you have to meet, talk to, and understand those individuals. Now, I'm going to go through a number of personas in the organization, and for those of you from other parts of the world, you may see yourselves or your colleagues in these personas, or you might not. And chatting that in the chat box could be fascinating. Thinking about your own personas in your part of the world is going to be critical, and as I mentioned, we can take that discussion offline. But I'm going to introduce you to the first persona, and that's someone we're going to randomly call Carla. By the way, these are just sample personas, not intended to be gender specific or even race specific, just personas, and just to get your mind, going in terms of really understanding the different personas in your organization, so that you can really relate to and therefore create buy-in at all levels. So there's a Carla in most organizations, and you may even recognize yourself or one of your colleagues in her. Carla is an aspiring senior manager at your company. She is very bright and highly motivated to rise to the top where her thought leadership can come to life. How many of you know a Carla? Feel free to chat about this. Carla understands the market, but is not included in meaningful decision-making, opportunities, or assignments, and feels excluded from what appears to be, a boys' club culture. Does Carla still sound familiar to you? Chat in the chat bar. Her experience does not line up with the company's stated values, as she experiences discrimination from subtle exclusion that maybe she can't even identify to blatant sexual harassment. And if she's a non-white employee, Her experience is, with both her white colleagues and even non-white men, don't seem to, they just don't seem to understand what she's experiencing on a daily basis. So feel free to enter into the chat box some other characteristics that are associated with this particular persona if this resonates with you in your organization. Now let's meet Larry. Larry is often a white male C-suite leader who came up through the ranks and, perhaps even in the old days and sees diversity and inclusion as soft cultural attributes that are a distraction to the real business of driving revenue. If you're on this call and you're a white male, please don't be offended. This is just a persona. We know very well that there are plenty of male champions throughout the world and on this call, and we respect and love you. We're just trying to help you understand certain different personas in order to sort of wrap your head around the buy-in process. So how many of you know a Larry? Feel free to chat in the chat bar about that. So Larry resents allocations of inequality or a boys' club, especially in an industry that's clearly male-dominated anyway. Larry realizes that public perception requires him to address D&I cultural issues, but he has no idea where to start. How many of you, still know this Larry? Larry is fearful of what he doesn't know, and even more fearful of making a mistake and misstepping in some way. Perhaps you recognize a Larry in your organization as well. And feel free to chat in the chat bar other characteristics of Larry. It does not have to be in this job, and especially if you have colleagues on the call, what have you, and you feel weird about chatting about that. It can be in any organization in which you have worked, so feel comfortable about that. So finally, there's a Max or Maxime or whatever you want to call him or her. Max is an HR professional or D&I practitioner or change champion within the organization. He's been trying for years to address the need to move women and people of color through the talent pipeline to senior leadership without making much headway. Do any of you know a Max or a Maxine in this situation? Now he's dealing with the momentum of #MeToo as well as the backlash that comes along with that. And Max is caught in the middle between senior leadership above and the employees who look to him for change and has become a scapegoat for everything that's not working culturally. Max is experiencing pressure from above to fix it, without a clearly articulated vision or specific goals or an adequate budget allocated. Feel free to enter into the chat box other characteristics of Max or Maxine, and certainly any other personas that you that are in your organization that you feel like you really need to understand, engage, and also get buy-in from for your engagements to be successful. So as a result of what these personas and others experience, these different individuals have certain emotions and perspectives at work. And so when you think of the persona that's in your mind, you need to be thinking about what they're experiencing as well. So for example, women like Carla feel that they don't have a voice. Their efforts and thought leadership are generally marginalized, and they begin to wonder if it's even worth continuing with the organization if they're never going to be seen as the leaders they want to be or they are. So chat, if this sounds familiar, this sense of not having a voice and kind of despondency. Many of these women, by the way, leave around just at or past middle management, director, senior director level because of this, because they're leaving to have children as well, but that just compounds things. And this, of course, has a negative impact on the percentage of women at the executive level and thus the company's ability to be at its best as a diverse workforce, but also in terms of the optics at the top, which then, is somewhat self-perpetuating. Now, if Carla is a person of color, she may feel isolated and adrift in a culture that doesn't value her. This persona sees a very sort of hazy and uncertain career path ahead of them and sometimes moves from organization to organization hoping for a stronger fit or a more inclusive culture. So definitely chat in the chat bar if you've experienced or observed this isolation. Now, let's talk about senior executives like Larry. They tend to feel overwhelmed because they're focused on driving business but have been inadequately exposed to the connection between inclusion and the business performance results they're looking for. Now, at this point, I want you to really think for yourself. Just kind of close your eyes and try to imagine what Larry is experiencing, and enter your thoughts in the chat box if you like, so that your colleagues can benefit from your observations. Larry, this persona is a person, if you're a diversity and inclusion professional, you may not like Larry, but you need to understand Larry and be able to relate to him and figure out a way to reach him. And finally, HR and diversity and inclusion professionals like Max feel frustrated, unable to make progress, stuck between employee concerns, legitimate complaints, and senior leadership, on the other hand, that lacks understanding and won't provide the resources to empower what they are requesting. This is a common state of organizations today in the U.S., and it would be fascinating to get perspective from others on this call with additional personas in your particular geography. By the way, many of our clients come to us in exactly the same position, and we're here today to provide you with some thought leadership to win the business case to help to serve all three of these personas and get buy-in from all three of these personas. So the first key to getting buy-in is making a case that matters for your organization, not some other organization, not some organization that you're trying to benchmark with, but your particular organization. So when companies pursue diversity and inclusion initiatives, oftentimes it has been based on the legal and regulatory issues surrounding diversity and inclusion, meaning the compliance necessary to protect against lawsuits, right? Other times the moral and ethical sense has prevailed that it's just the right thing to do for underrepresented groups who need help. But both of these approaches have pitfalls. On the legal side, the compliance concept has a limited impact on company culture, right? Compliance is about the bare minimum that's acceptable under the law, which might increase the number of diverse employees, at least at the entry level, but it does not create the benefits of inclusion to keep them there. And then on the ethical side, to many executives, doing something because it's the nice thing to do or the right thing to do seems weak and soft from a business perspective. As an added concern, this approach, by the way, can also come across as kind of, benevolent paternalism, to underrepresented groups. Creating the business case in a vacuum without developing context in which diversity and inclusion initiatives can support key organizational business priorities doesn't work. For example, a tech-forward company often values innovation, and there's a demonstrable link between inclusion and innovation, and so data associated with that connection will be critical. The important thing is that your business case should connect to the company's mission, right? Their vision, their strategic plan. So it is clear that the diversity and inclusion initiatives that you're proposing will provide success related to those predetermined business priorities of senior leadership. Remember, the ultimate goal is to show the competitive advantage to implementing these initiatives. That's what's going to get the attention of senior leadership. As I mentioned before, we're going to be sending out our business case deck with a wealth of statistics, okay, not just what I'm presenting here, but many, many more, as well as a summary of some of the information in this presentation so that you can utilize it to push forward the case for change in your own company. So be watching for that link. It'll show up in your inbox. But for now, I want to give you a few kind of key statistics that we find particularly compelling. There are basically three critical data points, and I'll give you 3 slides right now associated with that. that can really be the cornerstone of your business case. And keep in mind that this evolves over time, which is why it's so crucial that we update our business case deck for our clients and our network of colleagues. First, this particular study, the Phillips and Tuckerman framework, demonstrates that inclusive leadership improves diverse teams' performance. So on the bottom, the x-axis, you'll see diverse teams over time. And on the y-axis, you see the productivity and performance of those teams. On the bottom right, hopefully you can see this, the label shows the bottom line that represents diverse teams that are not managed inclusively. They start out poorly, and they actually don't perform very well at all. Just having diversity in the organization is not enough to see high performance results. So any leader who's telling you that the numbers are enough, it doesn't see the whole picture. They see the diversity part, but not the inclusion. Diverse teams not managed inclusively, in fact, perform much worse than homogeneous teams. Imagine that. However, diverse teams that are managed inclusively significantly outperform both other categories. So there's a tremendous amount of power in that to get budget not only for the actual numbers, the mix of people in the workplace, but inclusion initiatives that are going to keep them there, retain them, and advance them. Next, diversity drives company revenue. According to a study in the American Sociological Review, the companies that report the highest levels of racial diversity bring in nearly 15 times more sales revenue on average than those with the lowest levels of racial diversity. And additionally, gender equity plays a significant part in driving revenue. Every 1% increase in gender balance was found to be correlated with a 3% increase in sales revenue. So using information like this, diversity is not just a nice to have, it's a way to leapfrog the competition. Third, diversity drives employee engagement. The recent Gallup study of the American workplace showed that 83% of millennials report active engagement when they feel that they are in an inclusive environment, and companies with highly engaged workforces outperform peers by 140% in earnings per share. Now, keep this in mind, juxtaposed against the fact that the estimates are that 70% of workers, period, are not engaged. This is unbelievably powerful. So inclusion drives engagement, which drives company productivity and performance. And these are just a few of the many ways that diversity and inclusion impact business performance. This is a highly researched topic. And the statistics now are overwhelmingly clear, unlike in the past when we were really struggling to prove the business case. It's just a matter of framing the case in a meaningful way so that your art organization feels compelled to act. So now I'm going to pause to field some questions. And by the way, we all know that when Jim gives us those questions, they may be difficult to hear, so I will try to include in some way the question in the answer, and Jim will put himself on mute once he has fielded those questions or comments. So Jim, I'll leave it to you to let me know any sort of questions or comments that might be helpful to everyone before we move on.
All right, 2 or 3 things. First of all, we have quite a few people who have entered their credentials, and we appreciate that. For those that have questions, as Denise has said, please feel free to comment. What we've experienced in the past is other people react to your questions and respond with what they've experienced, where they are, and how they've addressed similar issues. So use the chat bar liberally. Second thing is Lisa came on and said she identified as an HR professional and female. So she was feeling the frustration as the experience with Carla are identified. And finally, you mentioned the legal case, and this is actually my question. And I just want you to address whether people should feel intimidated, because you're a lawyer, you may see it differently. Before someone jumps out and tries to present a case, there are legal issues to be considered. Should they be intimidated? How should they engage? Should they consult with the corporate attorney? Or should they just go ahead and try and take a stab at what they need? And with that, I'll turn it back to you.
And Jim, in terms of the legal part of it, is your question with regard to a DNI or HR professional who receives a complaint? What should they do?
No. When you're saying build a case, what I would suggest is I'm building a case. There may be legal implications that I don't understand.
Okay. So let me.
What should I do about that?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure if there's confusion, but building a business case and a legal case are two different things. This webinar is about winning the case for change. So it's winning the business case to get additional resources, funding, et cetera, from senior leadership. It is not in any way about building the legal case whatsoever. So that's not a part of this webinar at all. So with regard to the person who might be focused on the legal case, that is absolutely an issue to deal with your general counsel, to deal with your EEOC compliance officer, but that is not a part of this webinar. Happy to take that question offline. I just don't want to derail the others that are really trying to win the business case for change to get resources. And Jim, does that satisfy the response for now, or am I misunderstanding the question?
No, that was good.
Okay,
I have
good.
a question from Pete, and it has to do with your chart. He wants to know if the lower initial performance of diverse groups was due to diverse groups getting, and he puts in quotes, integrated.
Okay, that's a really good question. You'll need to read the research yourself to really understand it. And absolutely, you are correct that when you have diverse teams, and frankly, any team, there's always that storming, norming, process that takes place. And when you have a diverse team, that period of time may be even longer. But in general, no. They're talking about actual what we call inclusive leadership behaviors, right? So lead inclusively, we talk about the 3 R's of inclusive leadership: receptive, reflective, and revitalizing are how we characterize those behaviors. And when inclusive leadership behaviors are not part of the team culture, and that is where we're seeing the most significant problem. So thank you, Pete, for that. I appreciate it. Any other questions?
More questions.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
2 more. This is from Rebecca. Given that visible leadership in D&I from the top of the organization is so important, and this is the multi-million-dollar question, what are the first steps you might take to engage Larry? And how does that encourage and aid Larry to speak authentically about diversity and inclusion?
Okay, I love that question. Wow, that is a $1 million question. Totally and completely agree. So I'm going to give you my opinion on this after doing this for 25 years, and I'm not going to call it necessarily a traditional opinion. But my opinion is that Larry needs to be heard. So what we generally want to do with a Larry, especially when we are very equity oriented, is to debate with Larry, to try to give him enough information to shut him down. And that just doesn't work. At the end of the day, people are who they are, they feel how they feel, and every human being has to be validated. So, and that's so hard. If someone is saying, oh, this diversity and inclusion stuff is just soft nonsense or what have you, to be able to validate that so that you can diffuse him and get beyond that to demonstrate the actual business case for these initiatives is super difficult. And, what it looks like is saying, Larry, I totally get it that it seems soft initially. And even more than that, we are all working so hard to reach our numbers or to whatever issues you're dealing with. And I can so relate to the fact that this might seem like a mere distraction from what we're trying to accomplish. And just let him take that in so that he feels acknowledged. And then you can move on and say, here's what I'm thinking. Because you're so focused on, our profit, our P&L, our productivity, I want to be able to share with you the way that we can make this concrete, the way that we can, improve our branding externally and attract the right people, the way we can retain critical talent and not undergo the waste from turnover, and segue into his business priorities and connect those with your D&I initiatives. So does that help? I think, Jim, you said there was one more question, or if there's any reaction to that, I'm happy to field that as well.
Yeah, there's a couple others that came in. One of them is quite important. They only took note, Aaron, of two of the R's, reflective and receptive. What's the third R?
Reflective. Sorry, let's start at the top. Receptive, reflective, and revitalizing. And I will, and this, by the way, is a part of the other webinars, and also something we can get into in more detail if you want to reach out to me at info@leadinclusively.com. But I will just very quickly tell you what those are. Receptive is not only being accepting of the differences in others, but curious about the difference in others and being able to ask questions, bring those out. So that's the receptive part. The reflective is frankly, a leader who can be introspective about his or her own. And Jim, can you just put yourself on mute just for 1 second? So reflective is being able to be conscious of your own biases as a leader, and also being transparent with your decision making, so that people can see that your decision making is based on fact and not cronyism. And revitalizing is really being able to bring your own ethos and your own brand of inclusion to the team, and supporting the behaviors, the experimentation of ideas, et cetera, on your team. And happy to take that in more depth offline if you contact me by email. Jim, anything else?
Yes, please. Nye says he concurs with us, wants to know if you're referring to how a team functions and performs based on the quality of social connections and in terms of our conduct in everyday interactions. That's great.
That's great. That's a great question. I would say that leadership is, just to put it as tactfully as I can, highly influenced. Teams are highly influenced by the inclusion, the ability of the leader to have inclusive behaviors. That's, so for example, if you have a team, and women, by the way, are traditionally interrupted 8 to 10 times more than men, and that leader is not educated as to what inclusive leadership is and or is not utilizing those behaviors, then women are going to be shut down constantly. Their thought leadership is going to be attributed to other people. I mean, there's just no way around the good leadership in this regard. But I do agree also that the quality of the social connection is important. And of course, that can happen through the team itself, informally, after hours or even during the work function. But it's going to be influenced significantly by what leadership supports, acknowledges, et cetera. Great question.
And this one's kind of important and sensitive. Rachel heads up the ERG group in her company. They're for the LGBTQ ERG group. Anyway, they try to reach out to executives and engage all along the way. They do everything they can, but they feel and get the impression that the executives need to keep us, is what she says, at arm's length due to the implications of being involved with an LGBTQ group.
Thank you for that. That was very, and thank you for your transparency and your vulnerability and your willingness to discuss an issue that is this sensitive. This is a very significant problem. It really, really is. Somehow people have been able to wrap their arms around the fact that, supporting women is, a champion sort of behavior. We've even adopted the term male champion, for example. The same thing with race, even, although I would say less so, but still, you still feel like you're doing something benevolent. There is still, some sort of, I agree, a weird fear of affiliation, if particularly for heterosexual males, to champion or to support or to sponsor these groups, lest they should, be associated as, as gay when they're heterosexual. And it is extremely, it's the most difficult area, I would say. The other area that's very difficult can be disabilities, hidden disabilities, et cetera, but this one is a very sticky one. And I'm going to say that, again, the same formula as before, acknowledging just how difficult it is, for some of these heterosexual senior leaders, and how much you appreciate it, and then move on to the actual statistics associated with, recruiting the top talent, retaining that talent while it's here, the problems that are associated with having to mask that identity and the toll that it takes on the individual and therefore the productivity in the workplace. So I thank you so much for bringing up such a sensitive issue, and I wish I had a silver bullet for you. But for now, let me just say that I very much appreciate the question and understand just how difficult it is.
My comment, Denise, is I think a lot of executives feel that, for goodness sakes, we allowed you all, whoever you all represent, to create an ERG in the first place. Isn't that enough?
Yep, unfortunately, that is what happens. So let me, Jim, if it's okay, I think I'll move on here, and hopefully we'll have time for more questions. But for those of you, by the way, who didn't have the opportunity for a response, just email us at info@leadinclusively.com, and either I can answer or a member of my team can certainly send you in the right direction. Not a problem at all. So let's just briefly talk a little bit more. We talked about sort of, building the case, getting buy-in, and let's talk about, winning it, basically, the articulation of it. And in order to actually win the business case for change, creating organizational context as well as providing compelling objective data is still not, completely enough. The question you'll find yourself up against is, whenever you're trying to create buy-in around a new initiative, is why this and why now? So it's important to articulate the benefits and risks associated with it. And you can do this with a simple business SWOT analysis. I'm sure most of you have heard of SWOT, and use it in your business units, whether formally or informally or in your own mind about how you think about things. But basically, SWOT, simply stated, is a statement about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats associated with taking action. So, use the same elements of a business case that you might use for any other issue applies to your diversity and inclusion initiatives. In fact, the more that you can associate D&I with business, the better off you are, and the better aligned you will be with the business leaders that you need buy-in from. So you can also use what's called a pestle analysis to show impact in 6 different areas. And it doesn't have to be these areas. This is just to get your mind going about a more holistic view of this. So you have, for example, the economic impact, like sales revenue, the social impact, impact of corporate social responsibility goals or ability to recruit from underrepresented groups, the legal impact, such as reduction in complaints and lawsuits, the environmental impacts, which you can interpret as broadly or as narrowly as you like, including impact on the workplace environment, the technological impacts, for example, the impact on innovation, the political impact. You'll find both the SWOT and pestle analysis images, by the way, that I just showed you, included in the business case deck that we're going to send you after the webinar. It's also important to articulate the why now. So, for example, one big reason for taking action now is the social climate and the level of awareness that's quickly rising around diversity and inclusion issues. For companies that want to create a competitive advantage, they will need to move quickly and strategically in order to use D&I as a differentiator. For those of you who are D&I professionals out there, this is the time to really make a name for yourself as a professional, as being strategic. We're early in that transition that's occurring, and many companies are embarking on these sort of well-meaning initiatives that have no strategic legs. So those who are able to move boldly and confidently, and most important, strategically, will see significant benefits as a result. This is definitely one of the key moments in time to act, but there may be even more specific issues, opportunities, challenges that are more relevant. Perhaps, for example, there's a dismal employee engagement survey in your company, and those results need to be acted upon in some way, shape, or form. There may be egregious Glassdoor comments or scores that require proactive response, for example. Look for that problem and then hone in on it as a baseline to be improved. Now, this is a good time to chat if you have experienced a moment in time, any point in your career, that created a compelling urgency to move towards culture transformation. By the way, of course, if there's really bad press or there's really bad lawsuit or, God forbid, a class action suit, I mean, talk about urgency. That the why now is there, and hopefully, you've acted before that happens. But if not, that's certainly a galvanizing moment. And finally, it's important to clearly articulate the reason. I'm sorry, not the reason, the risk, basically. The risk of doing nothing. Doing nothing while other companies are taking action means falling behind in terms of talent, company culture, and innovation. In the past, employees were conditioned to accept whatever the work environment was, but that is no longer the case. So feel free to chat about what are the risks there may be of doing nothing at this point. Jim, I can see that we're getting, pretty close to the top of the hour. So let me stop again, because I think having the opportunity for questions and being able to, have the ear of someone like me who's done this for 25 years, as well as getting, interaction and suggestions from others on the line is pretty important. So I'm going to pause here again to see if there are any other comments or questions.
Well, a quick comment, and I truly appreciated it from Craig, going back to the question about LGBTQ, and he pointed out, so this is an example of collaboration amongst our attendees. Said that the company that Rachel is with is retailer, and in addressing the LGBTQ community, they have a spend in excess of $800 billion, almost $1 trillion now. We maintain those statistics on the National Diversity Council website as well. In any event, it's a wallet issue. There's $1 trillion roughly spend, and addressing that community when you're a retailer and getting buy-in, there's extreme loyalty within the LGBTQ community. So they need to be addressing not just the ERG, but the outreach program. And I thought that was a very important comment.
Yeah, Craig, if you could shoot me that statistic. I do not have that statistic. info@leadinclusively.com. Please send me that statistic, because I will research it, make sure that it is what it is, and then we'll add it to the business case deck. Because that's a big number. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have that also, and I'll send that to you. The ERG,
okay.
Vernon said they changed theirs, which is a subtle change from ERG to the now popularized term BRG, and that alone, just the term
business
created a whole
group.
different implication. Right.
Yeah, I like business resource group much better. Frankly, that's just a personal thing. I mean, the other thing that occurs to me for Rachel, and I'd be curious to see what others think about this, is that some companies will, first of all, call their ERGs or BRGs something different, and will. So, for example, we have a client that calls their BRG Evolve. And it actually is an acronym that stands for something, but it also gives the feeling of, look, we're trying to evolve as a company to an inclusion culture. And, part of me says, don't do that, because it's denying, the identity and the beauty of the, LGBTQ community. But I'm just kind of trying to think a little bit out of the box, because it is so crucial to get senior sponsorship. So, but I think that people should be using the chat bots to help Rachel and Craig and others to get some great thought leadership in this area. And Jim, is there anything else? Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted.
That's all right.
I said, let's move on so we can get to the end of the hour.
Okay, you got it. Okay, so basically, getting started is about creating a strategic direction. So the next webinar that we're having in a few months, and Jim and I don't have the date yet, but rest assured that we will send you an email on that. Basically, at this point, we're going to dive deeper into how to get started in the next webinar. We've set the foundation in these past 3 webinars, I think, really well. And now it's time to get started with creating a vision, a mission, values, and goals for your diversity and inclusion program, and also how to evaluate potential partners like us, for example. That's important too. I would actually love to, since we have people from Europe and from Asia on, it would be really important to get your comments before the next webinar. In other words, it would be good to have a more global approach to creating a vision, mission, values, etc. We're at a different place in each part of the world on this issue as it relates to everything from women to people of color to the LGBTQ plus community. There are some parts of the world where those groups of people are not even safe, let alone experiencing equity in the workplace. So the maturity model for this journey is very different and has to be respected and acknowledged and worked with for different parts of the world. We want you to be aware of all the different elements of an effective strategy, and so that's really what we're going to be focusing on in this next webinar. So we want you to understand how to use assessment instruments to evaluate HR processes for bias. We want you to know, what constitutes effective and sustainable learning and development. So, for example, we know for a fact now that there is no lift from unconscious bias training unless it's, and we even call our training from unconscious bias to inclusive leadership, because just raising the level of awareness is not getting us where we want to go. We have to teach these leaders what inclusive behaviors look like in a very practical way. And then we'll even be giving you strategies to scale and sustain the work you're doing as you embed these strategies into your company's business unit. So, for example, we have developed a learning management system so that we can scale our live trainings for our clients throughout the globe, which has been critical to scaling. But in terms of sustaining, we actually developed an inclusive leadership behavior change app to act as a companion to leaders with micro-learning, with drip messaging to support the learning so that it's sustainable. So we want you to just be aware of what's out there so that you can be super effective. So for now, you'll be receiving a recording of this webinar, the business case deck, which, by the way, is purposefully, it's an editable format. So what you're getting is going to be on our deck, but it's going to be in PowerPoint, not in PDF, so that you can list that information and use it. And there'll also be a link to our mini organizational inclusion assessment in your email as a thank you for attending the session, so look out for that. If you don't get it within 24 hours, please contact us at info@leadinclusively.com. So this is not to say we don't want your business. Of course we do. We'd love to work with you and consult and be your thought partner, but we also want you to have the tools to be successful, whether you do that with us or not. And Chelsea, if you just put in the chat bar, again, our email address so that people have that. And other than a closure, Jim, we do have, just leave me with a minute, to say goodbye, but we have time, we have time for questions. If you're getting anything in the chat bar, I am happy to entertain that before I do a quick inspirational close, I'll call it.
Okay, very good. We can't wait for that. We have going on about the distinction between ERG and BRG. Do the employees lose focus when it becomes a BRG? And I just loved Linda's input, which is from Nokia. They changed their organizations to EBP, Employee Business Partners. And that
nice.
Makes a heck of a lot of sense. Very nice. I thought.
Yep.
And by the way,
that's what I call innovation and thought leadership. If you know what's not working in the past, that's called, best practices are historical. These are next practices. So to Nokia, congratulations that you saw that whatever the acronym wasn't working and you invented a new one. And I bet you it's going to catch on.
I agree with that 100% personally. By the way, just so everyone knows, this webinar has been sponsored by the National Diversity Council. Feel free to contact us. We can be reached at www.nationaldiversitycouncil.org. And, of course, you can reach back to Denise and her organization. This, once again, is the third of 4. So next month we're going to have another webinar. Everyone will be posted. We have quite a few attendees who have attended the first 2 and now this one. If you missed any part of the first 3 presentations, contact either myself or Denise, and we'll be glad to provide you links to those so you can see the other presentations as well. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Denise for her inspirational closing comments.
And I'll just say thank you to Jim and to the National Diversity Council for partnering with us and for having the faith in us that you do, that we can provide value to your members. What I wanted to say in closing is that it's really important for all of us who are dedicated to making gender parity and diversity and inclusion in our organizations and economic imperatives that we need to work together to make that happen. So as far as I'm concerned, every participant on this call is an honored colleague. Reach out on LinkedIn, stay in touch. And don't forget about the next webinar, where we'll help you to evaluate the many different types of D&I partners, help you to get started, help you to see what's out there so that you can be positioned for success along the way. And keep an eye out for that announcement, and be sure to register before the session fills up. Every session that we have, it seems like gets larger and larger and larger, which is fantastic. The more thought leadership, the better. So thank you for your time this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be patient and stoic, and just keep moving ahead on this issue, and reach out to us if we can be of any assistance whatsoever.
Thank you so much, and thanks especially to our international attendees. We sincerely appreciate your input, because we tend to be closed in a little bit here stateside-wise. So any comments that you can share with the group, we appreciate, and we'll be glad to share those with the attendees as well. Thank you once again for attending. We look forward to seeing you all next month. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jim.